Everyone, it's my pleasure to introduce Julia Rodriguez, who, if you've never been to one of her talks before, is a very unique speaker at these firesides, mixing emotional honesty with incredible intellection about theology in the Baha'i faith. Julia is a psychiatric nurse practitioner who has worked in the mental health field for the past 12 years, treating a wide range of mental health disorders, including depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD, and others. Her practice as a mental health provider has been greatly sustained by her faith as a Baha'i and the corresponding belief that human suffering, in whatever form it takes, and however painful it may be, can provide, if seen through an accurate lens, an opportunity for spiritual growth and development, both in the psyche and the soul. While medical science's knowledge of the root causes of mental health disorders remain in its infancy and the current treatments are subpar at best, her words, not mine, it is Julia's belief that emotional relief can be found not only through medical treatment, but also through faith, prayer, and knowledge that each human being has a greater purpose in life that transcends their suffering, no matter how severe. She is an incredible friend at these firesides and has given some amazing talks in the past, and I really recommend, if you look us up on YouTube, listen to one of her talks, but you have the treat of seeing it live. Julia, tell us about her dreams.
I'm always impressed by the way that I'm introduced here. It makes me sound like someone that I myself would like to know, so I appreciate that loving introduction. Okay, so I'm going to share as I begin to talk. Let's see. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So tonight, I have the pleasure and challenge of talking about a sign of God, a spiritual gem that God has given us to show us a path and to prove to us the existence of our spiritual being. So we're going to talk about dreams and the science of them, and also the guidance in the Baha'i writings about what they are. If you guys are used to if you've seen my talks before, I like to have a lot of the scripture in it, because that really is what we're talking about. And then I'll add my little ad libs thing in between. So this is from Baha'u'llah. "O brother, if we ponder each created thing, we shall witness a myriad perfect wisdoms and learn a myriad new and wondrous truths. One of the created phenomena is the dream. Behold how many secrets are deposited therein, how many wisdoms treasured up, how many worlds concealed." So in the research that I did for this presentation, I think the biggest takeaway that I got from looking at all at least the translated into English Baha'i writings on dreams, was this idea that the dream world is a world, that it's a real world, and that it's a place that our spirit and our soul can be freed in the time of sleep. And then it's not just the way we think of it, like, oh, I was dreaming about something. There's actually a place that we can travel and have spiritual discoveries. And we'll talk about the difference between dreams that are not spiritual discoveries, that are your average, maybe just something that was bothering you during the day, and the ones that Baha'u'llah says can truly guide us places spiritually. Again, this is Baha'u'llah. "Now there are many wisdoms to ponder in the dream. First, what is this world, where without eye and ear and hand and tongue, a man puts all of these to use? Second, how is it that in the outer world thou seest today the effect of a dream, when thou dost vision it in the world of sleep some 10 years past?" So these are going to be some of a little bit of science, for example, of this idea of our body shutting down. We don't have access to our physical senses when we're dreaming, of course. And the idea that as the body shuts down is when the soul is free. It's a very interesting concept that's talked about quite a bit in this presentation. And there's another concept that's drawn upon in the writings quite a bit, which is the idea that one of the things that a dream can do is that it can tell the future. So there are people who have the experience of dreams that will later come into fruition. And a lot of times we think about that scientifically. I think we call it déjà vu. This idea that I've already seen something. This déjà vu from the French means already seen. And some people speculate that déjà vu is in fact the idea that you've dreamt this before. And so now when you see it in your day-to-day life, you have indeed seen it before, but you don't know from where. That's speculation on the part of some sleep specialists, but it's an interesting thing to ponder. Among all the worldly bounties, none is more wonderful than the dream. In this state, the human spirit is able to release itself in such a way that the contingent phenomena become cut away. And this, of course, refers to the idea that contingent phenomena being the physical, right? So the physical is cut away and the soul is now, has this beautiful, wonderful gift, which is to be able to release itself. And in this dream, we have the potential, if we're gifted with a dream that's divine and coming from a divine source, to be guided, to be shown the future, a number of things. We'll look at them as we continue. So this is some of the complexity of this idea of the dream world. That's why it's interesting. It would be true if thou were to contend that this same world is within thy proper self and is wrapped up within thee. It would equally be true to maintain that thy spirit hath been made to traverse a realm which lieth hidden in the innermost reality of this world. Verily I say, the creation of God embraceth worlds besides this world, and creatures apart from these creatures. So this particularly to me was interesting because you have the duality, right, of this dream world being within us, right? It's within our psyche, within our soul. It's not an extension somewhere else, another world. So it's within us, it's wrapped up within us. But then it's also true that it's a place that our souls can travel to. So it's in an innermost reality of another world, and our souls can travel. And this is one of the dualities that you often see in the Baha'i writings, where the manifestation says, I am Jesus, I am Moses, I am Muhammad, and at the same time, his name is Baha'u'llah. So we see these dual realities where both things can be equally true, which I thought was particularly interesting here. And then I really like this last paragraph because I had never seen it as it is actually in the writings, where it follows on this part about the dream, this idea that the creation of God embraces worlds besides this world and creatures apart from these creatures. It's a very interesting concept because I'd always thought about it in the context of other planets and other creatures and that kind of thing. And I'm sure I would imagine it refers to that as well. But it's interesting here to see it combined in the, following on writings that talk about dreaming. What that means, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to contemplate. So let's talk a little bit about the science of dreaming, what we know from medical science. There's a number of things that dreams are said specifically to be important for doing. One of which is the consolidation of memory. So when you dream at night, your brain kind of like files away, what are things that are important for me to remember? Where would they go? How can I retrieve them later if it's something of importance, an essay you want to remember, or a talk that you liked. Equally, it will clear away things that are not important. So it's kind of like housekeeping. It will decide what's important, store it someplace that it can be retrieved, and then it will, throw away things like, someone honked at me at the red light and it made me upset. Okay, we don't really need to retain that. So our brain does this sifting of important versus non-important things. And then we retain the ones that are of importance, or most of them. Another reason for dreaming is that we review and analyze events. So sometimes we will have a dream that maybe reflects in some way an emotion that we had during the day or something that happened. And perhaps it's our way of the brain kind of analyzing what happened, how would we respond to this in future, how did we respond to it, almost like rehearsing it, like how did that go, kind of a place where the brain is able to review. And then processing emotion, that same idea, right? So maybe if something upset me during the day and I kind of have the dream at night about that conversation I had with someone, maybe it's the idea that my brain is rehearsing that and kind of saying, how did that go? Like I said, what could I have done differently? Kind of playing it back, right? So you can review it. So these are the things that currently in science, we think dreaming is about and why it's important. And this is definitely why you do not want to pull an all-nighter, because if you study all night, you're not helping yourself. You want to study and you want to sleep, because in the sleep, you're going to retain what you've pulled an all-nighter. If you try to study the whole night and go to the test, your brain really doesn't have that information organized in a way that's retrievable for testing. So, study and then sleep. Make sure you do that. That's going to be better for you. All right. So In sleep, we know that we are both paralyzed and unconscious, meaning that as we go into the deeper and deeper stages of sleep, and I wish I knew the specifics about it, but I know you go into different stages of sleep. The deeper you go, the more your physical senses get turned off. So as you get into the deepest part of sleep, it's when you really, someone could like yell in your ear practically and you won't wake up. Whereas like in the lighter stages, somebody would just be in the next room kind of whispering and you might be able to wake up, right? So your body is going into this deeper stages of sleep where all of your sense organs are shutting down. And what's interesting about this is that it's only when we get to the deepest stage of sleep when all of our sense organs are basically almost as if we were dead, almost. They're that far turned off. That's when our soul soars. That's when we dream. So it's an interesting thing that our body has to turn off so that our soul can be free. Those are my words, but I think you would perhaps draw the same conclusion from what we're going to read. So some of the science, sleep is absolutely essential for our health. We don't really know why we sleep a third of our lives. I mean, it's a long time to sleep, 8 hours out of every 24 hours. That's many, many years when you add them up of sleep in a person's lifetime. But we know that it has multiple vital roles. And we know that if you deprive someone of sleep, within a few days, they'll be psychotic. They'll be, I've seen it before when people take, stimulants or they take, methamphetamine and they're up for 3 days, all of a sudden, they believe they're being attacked by demons. Like sleep is so important for the brain. So deprivation is a form of torture. And this part about bodies being paralyzed or brains being active. So all of the sense organs shut down, and yet the brain, we know it's receiving because we can see it, I guess, on EEGs and things that they do, they can see that it's receiving stimuli. So even though the physical environment is not providing that stimuli, it's awake as if it were. So this is one of those kind of mysteries, right, about what's happening. And this is why the Baha'i writings are helpful, because they're clearly saying it's not physical stimuli. Your soul is being stimulated by where it's traveling or what it's seeing or what it's learning. That's why your brain is active. So it's an interesting fill in the blank there that the Baha'i writings provide. And this is Abdu'l-Baha, and this is kind of what I was saying. He says, in the time of sleep, this body is as though dead. It does not see nor hear. It does not feel. It has no consciousness, no perception, that is to say. The powers of man have become inactive, but the spirit lives and subsists. Nay, its penetration is increased, its flight is higher, and its intelligence is greater. So I personally found that last part to be so incredible, right? Because, okay, this top paragraph, he's saying, basically what science is saying, your physical senses are turned off and you're almost as if you were kind of like dead. You don't have anything. But then he goes on to say that the spirit lives and subsists, and actually the intelligence is greater and the penetration is increased. It's such a fascinating understanding of what sleep is. And it's transformative for me because many of us kind of think about it as a non-issue, right? We go to bed, we sleep, and then we come back to real life, and this is what we do. And the sleep is just something that's like a placeholder, right? We have to do it. And here Abdu'l-Baha is saying, actually, in sleep, you can you have far greater capacity for things. And I was reading, as I was researching for this, I was reading about I think it was Einstein and some of the people who invented or had great inspiration to come up with new things that transform society. And I think it was Einstein. He would fall into a state of sleep. He would hold a ball in his hand and allow himself to fall asleep, and then the ball would fall out of his hand and he would wake up. But it was so important in his mind to go into that, at least that early stage of sleep, because he found that he was able to answer questions that he could not find the answer to in waking. So just by barely entering that sleep phase, he himself found that he was more able to attain to insights and discoveries. And we'll see Abdu'l-Baha continue to talk about this. So this is something I did in my work earlier on. Worked with trauma victims, particularly with combat veterans. And there's a subset of many combat veterans, of course, who have PTSD, of trauma. And then there's a subset of them that have recurrent nightmares. And, some people will have just random nightmares, there'll be different themes, but there's a small group of people that have a recurrent nightmare. It's the same nightmare. They have it either every night or several times a week, and it's the same story. And so it was very interesting in my study that to see what they did with this. And it was actually, we called it re-scripting the nightmare. So we would have a group therapy session, and I think they probably would have individual therapy as well, and they would process the narrative of what it was. And oftentimes it was a narrative that actually happened, right? Like, you know, a friend was wounded and you had to leave him behind, right? And so you have the nightmare night after night of leaving your friend behind, and him saying, you know, don't leave me or whatever, and you running away to safety. And so these would be the nightmares these people would be tormented with. And so what we would do with rescripting was we would talk through that process of what was it, right? And we wouldn't make a happy ending. You can't make a happy ending. Your friend has been left behind and died. But we would make an ending that the person could come to terms with emotionally. For example, the person would have an extra minute to sit with their friend and say, I'm going to tell your mother how brave you were. I'm sorry, I'm going to cry on this because it was just so beautiful the way people would process it. Like the thing that tormented them was that they'd told the mom, I'll take care of him. And then they left him behind. So when they rescripted this nightmare, you know, therapeutically with the help of a therapist, they said the things that they needed to say, like, you were brave, and I wish I could save you, but I can't. Something that put their heart at ease. And then by reviewing that process, they would then ultimately, many of them would successfully transform that dream, and then the dream would stop tormenting them. The dream would go away. So it's almost like that processing of something that's happening in that dream, the ability to manipulate it, process it, and have some type of better outcome. So it's very interesting scientifically, and I don't think we know enough about how it works, but it was quite interesting. Okay, going back to solving problems and the thing I mentioned about Einstein, Abdu'l-Baha says, the soul, whether it be in sleep or waking, is in motion and ever active. It may in a dream unravel an intricate problem, incapable of solution in the waking state. So again, there the idea that perhaps, you know, these are my thoughts, but when we detach from the trappings of the world, right, the things that we maybe the preconceived notions about whatever science we're studying or whatever we're trying to invent, and we all of a sudden our soul maybe is released from some of those restraints, it now is able potentially to unravel an intricate problem or solve something that it can't solve in a waking state. Those are my analysis, but it may make sense to others, that the reason why we're able to do that in the dream state. I got to move you guys because I can't see my, there we go. Okay, so going on, this is the same concept. How often it happens that man ponders a question in wakefulness, but he is unable to solve it. Then in the world of the dream, it happens that the answer is discovered. Frequently, such a dream is a true dream, inasmuch as that which is seen becomes manifested to the outer eye, requiring no interpretation. So in a little bit, we'll talk about the different types of dreams that Abdu'l-Baha describes. Some of them are interpreted. You have to interpret them to understand them. Some of them are true, absolutely exactly what happened is what you know, what the dream says. And then some of them are what he calls, excuse me, confused. And in the confused dreams, like I said, it's that kind of meaningless dream that is just kind of our brain acting up. It's not really related to any spiritual discovery. And we'll talk about this more as we read. All right. So this is interesting, right? Because a lot of science focuses on what's happening in the brain. And here Abdu'l-Baha is clarifying that it's not in the brain, it's in the soul. So it's not an organ thing. Of course, the soul is associated with the body, so we know that the organs are associated with the soul, but it's not within the brain itself. In the state of sleep, without eyes it sees, without an ear it hears, without a tongue it speaks, without feet it runs. These actions are beyond the means of instruments and organs. Awake, he sees the present. In sleep, he sees the future. In sleep, in the twinkling of an eye, he traverses the east and the west. And so, as I understand it, Abdu'l-Baha is making, kind of proving the point that, excuse me, if we can do all these things, we can talk, we can run, we can travel, we can see in our sleep, that it's a proof that our soul is independent of the body, and the body perhaps has a relationship with the soul, of course, but that the spiritual senses don't require the body. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about this. Now, this is from the Seven Valleys, and it's really, I thought it was really beautiful and interesting. And it's a person called Luqman. I'm not sure who he is, but he's someone in religious scripture that I'm not familiar with. And he's trying to prove to his son that the life after death exists. And these are his words. He says, if thou art able to sleep, thou art able to die. And if thou art able to waken after sleep, thou art able to rise after death. Just as there is waking after sleep, there is rising after death. And I thought it was so insightful, because he's basically saying, like, look, you're going to go to sleep tonight, and whether or not you like it, you're going to wake up, you know? And so the same thing, he's kind of making this analogy that the same thing is going to happen after you die. You're not going to die and remain dead. You're going to wake up in this next life. And that's the way I understood it. So it's a very interesting argument, because we all have the experience where, you know, we wake up in the morning. We always wake up in the morning. So I thought it was kind of scientific in an interesting way. Again, Abdu'l-Baha here, proof of life after death. He says, a person, speaking of a person in the dreams, a person is dead. Afterward, you see him in the world of dreams and speak with him. Who is the person you see in your dreams, talk to, and who also speaks with you? This proves that there is another reality different from the physical one. And then he also explains that, you know, yes, in our dreams we hear a voice, and we may say something with our own voice, and we see someone in the body that we're accustomed to seeing them, but that these are not actual physical senses. These are kind of the spiritual lens through which we're seeing. So yes, we can talk, we can hear, we can see, but in fact, this is all proof of another reality that is beyond those physical things. So this part to me is really where it gets good, right? Because it's basically like, okay, up to this point, I've kind of described some of the writings, and they say these amazing things can happen in dreams, and, you know, how wonderful that we can have spiritual discoveries. And yet, okay, well, that's not happening to me. You know, I'm waking up every day and I just had like a dream that made no sense, and maybe it kind of upset me or this or that. So Abdu'l-Baha is really helpful in that he kind of describes, hey, if you want to have these spiritual discoveries, then you need to prepare for dreams. And this is what he says. When a man's soul is cleansed, sensations felt by the heart are produced. Spiritual emotions are generated. Man is detached from things which are tangible and experienceth those of the spirit. What remarkable discoveries are made! It may even be that detailed communications are registered. And I should clarify, all this was in the context of dreaming. So he's basically saying, you know, if your soul is clean, if it's cleansed when you're ready to sleep, you have more access to spiritual emotions. You're going to be more detached from the day-to-day, and therefore you will be more in the presence of the soul when you're dreaming. And then remarkable discoveries can be made. And this idea that detailed communications can be registered, meaning, in my understanding, that there is a transmission of a spiritual truth in some way. Again, that's my paraphrasing, my thought process, but maybe it makes sense to others. So clarifying again, how do we receive this insight? Abdu'l-Baha says, whatever is answered through the dream state happens without personal volition, but man can prepare himself that a better dream may be realized. It is like a guest who comes. If the owner of the house freshens and cleans it, its coming is easier. So very interesting idea that you're essentially, you're not creating the dream. You're not making the dream happen. You're not saying, I got to solve this mystery and I'm going to solve it. You're preparing yourself to receive that inspiration or to receive that insight. And in doing so, you of course want to pray, and you'd want to, he mentions other things like bathe and put on perfume and be in clean clothing. So even the physical body should be prepared for spiritual insight. And it's interesting that he also makes the analogy to, you know, freshening up your home for when a guest comes. Of course, you would want your home to be prepared for the guest. You wouldn't want to receive a guest of importance in a dirty home. So it's interesting, even the analogies that he uses, how helpful they are. And then there is this concept that the other souls who have passed on can help us. And this is through prayer and also through dreams. And he says, when you are in a receptive attitude, they are able to make suggestions to you if you are in difficulty. So this idea that you might call upon a loved one, or even you call upon Abdu'l-Baha or a soul that's passed and ask for their assistance, if you are in a receptive attitude, which I imagine would be prayerful and, you know, with trying to have purity of heart, then you may be able to receive these suggestions and get help from them. So now here we talk a little bit about seeing the future, which is interesting. And again, we return to this idea of the dream world being separate from the world that we live in. This is Bahá'í, I think. Behold how the thing which thou hast seen in thy dream is, after a considerable lapse of time, fully realized. Had the world in which thou didst find thyself in thy dream been identical with the world in which thou livest, it would have been necessary for the event occurring in that dream to have transpired in this world at the very moment of its occurrence. The world in which thou livest is different and apart from that which thou hast experienced in thy dream. So using this idea of time, which is obviously a part of our experience in our physical bodies and in this physical world, he's basically, to my understanding, saying, time is not a thing there. We have time here, but this can happen. You can see this ahead of time in the world of the dream. And therefore, we are proving that they can't be the same world. This has to be a different world, because if you can see the future, clearly it's not, me thinking about something in the current world that I'm living in. There's a different experience in a different world. Now what this means, I think we could all meditate on this every night for the next, 500 lifetimes and not understand it, but it's interesting material to begin with. Okay, so this idea that to receive guidance, we need our heart to be sanctified and pure. And I think this would apply for waking as well as sleeping, in terms of spiritual insights. But here we're obviously focused on the sleeping. This is a talk from Bahá'í. He says, the ability of the human spirit to free itself, however, is dependent upon a heart that is sanctified and pure. If the heart of man has not attained this state, it will become very fearful in the world of the dream, and things will appear distorted in its view. But if the heart becomes purified, in the dream, man is freed. So very interesting here that he's making a connection between a pure and sanctified heart and the ability to be free of fear. I thought this was particularly interesting. He's referring to it here in the context of dreams, that you're not going to be afraid if your heart is pure. You might be afraid if you had, some malintent or some envy or something that was creeping in. But I think you can extrapolate potentially this idea that a purity of heart perhaps allows one to be free of fear in general, because, that quote that says, armed with the power of thy name, nothing can ever hurt me. This promise from God that if with his name and with his power, we'll not be hurt. So here he's making that specifically in the context of the dream as well. Okay, so Shoghi Effendi, we love Shoghi Effendi because he always gives us like the little balance, right, to check us and make sure that we're understanding it correctly. So he's going to there's a few paragraphs that I'll read here in the next couple of slides where he's basically saying, don't get ahead of yourselves. You don't necessarily understand everything that's happening, so don't assume that you do, because you might get off course. And so I'll read a bit of his words. He says, there is no question that visions occasionally do come to individuals, which are true and have significance. On the other hand, this comes to an individual through the grace of God, and not through the exercise of any of the human faculties. It is not a thing which a person should try to develop. When a person endeavors to develop faculties so that they might enjoy visions, dreams, what they are doing is weakening certain of their spiritual capacities, and thus under such circumstances, dreams and visions have no reality and ultimately lead to the destruction of the character of the person. So I think we have to put this in the context of the whole thing, right? So we're not being told, Abdu'l-Baha is clearly saying you can welcome spiritual discoveries, you can welcome dreams that may be guided, but clearly both he and Shoghi Effendi are saying, you're not doing this, right? You're not making this happen. You have to be clear that you're allowing yourself to be a receptacle through something that God may inspire of you. And if you try just the way we're told we're not to, do things like with psychic powers, for example. If we try to do those things, we're kind of manipulating something, like someplace we're not supposed to go, is basically the way that I would describe it. So I understand Shoghi Effendi to be saying, okay, yeah, this can definitely happen to people and you can definitely have those visions, but don't walk in the occult, so to speak. Don't go in this place where you're going to start to interpret all this stuff and think you know what it is, because you may be led astray. And here he clarifies further. Dreams and vision are always colored and influenced more or less by the mind of the dreamer, and we must beware of attaching too much importance to them. The purer and more free from prejudice and desire our hearts and minds become, the more likely it is that our dreams will convey reliable truth. But if we have strong prejudices, personal likings and aversions, bad feelings or evil motives, these will warp and distort any inspirational impression that comes to us. So I think this is very helpful, right? So, yes, we can get this insight, but we have to be aware that, this is the idea of the pure and sanctified heart, right? If a dream comes to my heart wants it to be something, right? Like I would like Abdu'l-Baha to be telling me to, trample on a colleague so that I can get ahead, or I would like Abdu'l-Baha to be telling me that this man is the man of my dreams and I'm going to run away with him, then I may have that. I may read into my dream that that's what's happened. In fact, it's actually my own desires that's being communicated there. So strong prejudices, these are the things that he says would color a dream and make it not a true dream. Strong prejudices, personal likings and aversions, bad feelings or evil motives. So essentially, if that stuff is at play, we can basically say we can't read the divine inspiration here because we've put poison in a pure glass of milk. Now the milk is no good. So that's the way I would understand it. So this is why we're cautioned not to think that we understand stuff that we don't. And then he goes on here. We cannot be positive that an impulse or a dream is guidance. We can seek through earnest prayer and longing sincerely to do God's will, his guidance. We cannot be sure that doing these things we're still making no mistakes and are perfectly guided. These things help us not to make so many mistakes and to receive more directly the guidance God seeks to give us. So again, I just hear him saying here, tempering this idea that we definitely know what we're dealing with. He says this about daily inspiration as well. I mean, it's not only sleeping, but it's waking. Like we feel like we have an insight, we know something that God wants of us or something that would be true to the cause. We're always supposed to check that with, is this what the teachings say, right? So like my dream may have been very inspirational, but does it match what the teachings would indicate? If it does, then great, I can't go wrong, right? If it doesn't, then it was colored by my own personal inclinations, and therefore it's not a true dream. So this is just an illustration that talks about different, there's so many thinkers that have, or philosophers in the past who've come up with what dreams are about. We know Freud and Jung and some of these people some of what they, have said has been debunked now. Some of it is still potentially considered to be true, but all of these ideas of what it is. And what I like about this slide is that we have this stuff and it's like, okay, this could be all of it. And then we have Abdu'l-Baha and we're like, okay, great. Now we know exactly what it is. So these are some thinkers and their ideas, and some of them may be true, but we've luckily got the roadmap. So a little bit about the ancient history of dreams. How am I doing on time? Okay. I'm not too far for the end. So a little bit about dreams throughout history, because obviously we know dreams have been something that people have considered important for millennium. And apparently throughout ancient history, they've been considered very important for healing. And there was this thing called dream incubation, where people would go to a temple or a specific spot, and they would sleep in this spot with the intention of receiving healing or receiving insight. And this was practiced by Mesopotamians, Greeks, Jews, and Muslims. And it was thought that nightmares could help them diagnose the problem in order to restore balance of the body, and that dreams could give information about the past, the present, and even the future. And then specifically in religious history, we know that, in the Old Testament, we've got a lot of stories about dreams and how they guided, the lesser prophets. For example, Abraham was instructed to sacrifice his son Isaac. Muslims have corrected this to know that the son was Ishmael, but this idea that he was instructed to sacrifice his son, and then as we know, the last minute he was relieved of doing that, but he was faithful to God by carrying out what he was told to do in his dream. Similarly, Joseph, I'm not sure if people remember the story, but the father who had his favorite son, who the brothers were envious and they sold him into slavery in Egypt. He had a dream about his son, and I can't remember the details, but so this is something that's repetitive, certainly in the Old Testament as well as in other texts. Okay, so now the nuts and bolts of how Abdu'l-Baha breaks down dreams for us, so that we know what we're dealing with. So he clarifies that there are 3 types of dreams, and I've alluded to this thus far. One is a true vision, which has no need of interpretation. Exactly what is seen, the same thing occurs. It is reality. And he clarifies that true visions really only happen to people who are stainlessly pure, like the prophets. Baha'u'llah received the dream when he was in the Siyashal. The maiden came to him and told him that he was the prophet, the manifestation of God. So this is a pure, true vision. He knows exactly what's being said, and it's the accurate truth. And then the second type of dream, which is really the dream, the highest level that mere mortals can get to, which are dreams that require interpretation. And he says, when a spiritual journey is attained, it must be interpreted, and false thoughts must be separated from spiritual discoveries. So essentially, you have a dream, it has divine guidance in it, but it has to be interpreted because of the way that you understand the world, or the particular things about that maybe your thinking is a certain way. So you have to interpret that dream to get the spiritual discovery. And there may be some things in that dream that aren't really important, right? They were just thoughts in your head that weren't relevant to the spiritual discovery. And then the last one is the confused dream. And he says, during the day, you're engaged in an argument. Later, these same circumstances appear in a dream. There's no interpretation and contains no discoveries. And he clarifies that this is the most common dream, which is why most of us have dreams. We wake up and we don't really much think about them or care about them, because a lot of times they're confused dreams. And perhaps they're often confused dreams because if anyone is like me, I go to bed when I'm like, tired and haven't prepared myself necessarily spiritually, and I'm thinking about stuff that happened. So I'm not creating the receptivity, and in response, probably more than necessary of my dreams are confused dreams. Now, these are from Pilgrim's Notes, but they kind of line up. And this is why Pilgrim's Notes are not considered to be completely accurate, but they're still interesting. May Maxwell described that Abdu'l-Baha told her about 3 types of dreams: the body influencing the soul, which is the confused dream where the body, your thoughts and your inclinations and your irritabilities influence the dream; the soul manifesting itself, which I would understand as the interpretive dream; and then the Holy Spirit influencing the soul, which I would understand to be the true vision. And then Juliet Thompson, she wrote about it slightly differently. Her language was the dream caused by a bodily disorder. Again, I think the confused dream, your body is, the irritations of your body are making you dream something. Symbolic dreams, which I think would be the interpretive, and dreams in which future events are foretold. So that's slightly different. But I think, when you think about the visions that the manifestations of God and the, spiritual beings, typically they're telling them something that they're supposed to do or something that they're supposed to be. There is an indication of something that is supposed to be done. They're not just told like you're important, okay, enjoy it. It's like this is your mission, therefore now you do it. So I would understand that to be the true vision as well. So a few examples in Baha'i history of dreams that were of importance. Many of you probably have heard this story, but it was Baha'u'llah's father. When he was still a child, he dreamt of Baha'u'llah swimming in an ocean, and his hair was extended all around his body, this beautiful long black hair. And on each of the strands of hair, a fish had fastened. So there were fishes, all these fish holding onto this beautiful hair that was floating in the ocean. And in this dream, he was so impressed because he was just unimpeded in the ocean, and all of his hair was there, right? So even with all the fish pulling on him, he remained intact and unaffected. And the soothsayer, which is I think a word that means dream interpreter, that may have been something in the society at that time, he interpreted this as the limitless ocean is the world of being. The multitude of fish signifies, I can't see it. Signifies the tumult which he will arouse amidst the people. So Baha'u'llah is going to cause a lot of mischief to happen because of this new revelation. And the fact that no hair detached was the unfailing protection of the Almighty, which would always protect him. So this was the interpretation Baha'u'llah's father was given of his young son. And therefore, I don't know if he, at this point, recognized him as a manifestation of God, but he knew he was someone of vital importance spiritually. So he had this insight because of this dream. Tahereh, as most of you guys know, was the premier woman in the Baha'i dispensation, the follower of the Bab. She also recognized Baha'u'llah. But she never, as far as I understand, she never met the Bab. No, she didn't meet him. So she went to anyways, she didn't meet him. She learned about him in a dream. So in this dream, a Sayyid, which is a person who's a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, who wears a green turban, they're denoted by certain clothing. A Sayyid appeared to her in the heavens, and he was reciting verses and praying. And in the dream, she memorized one of the verses that he was reciting. And later she came upon a work of the Bob's first published book. And in the book was the same verse that she had memorized in her dream. And this is the moment that she accepted the Bob, and they said that she fell down and prostrated herself on the ground and thanked God for his grace and became a Baha'i. So here we got an example of dreams that were not interpreted correctly. Abdu'l-Baha, when he was getting close to the time of his death, he had a dream, and the dream Baha'u'llah said, "Destroy this room." And he knew that the room referred to his physical body and that his death was impending. But because his family didn't want to see that reality, or that, they had personal likings that would have included him remaining with them, they started cleaning his room and doing things to the physical room. And as such, they were not prepared for his death. But Abdu'l-Baha himself understood the dream to mean the room was his physical temple, and the room was to be destroyed. He was going to pass. So just if you guys always know that I put my personal life in there because it helps me to understand things as I apply it. So I've had certain dreams that were like, I went back as I was reading this and understanding this to say, what were these dreams really? Like, what did these really mean? Because they were impactful to me. And one of the ones I had a dream that showed the future, and it was a dream that required interpretation. And my mother, who at the time knew she was terminally ill, but she had not told me, in the dream, she asked me, she was insisting to me, she said, "Come and help me prepare my dress. I'm going on a journey." And it was this kind of beautiful, white dress that a child might wear to their baptism. And I saw the dress, and I knew that this was not a regular journey. And I got upset with her in the dream. And I started saying to her, "Why do you have to go? Where are you going?" I was angry with her. And she just kept saying to me, "I need you to help me prepare my dress." And so I woke up, and I really knew, like, consciously, I didn't know this exactly meant she was going to die, but I knew I had a fear in my heart that now I knew she was going to die. And I called her, and she asked me to come home and see her. And then she knew, once I had that dream, that it was time to tell me the truth. And so when I came home, she sat with me and told me she was going to pass. But the interesting part about the dress, preparing the dress, was that without me realizing it, the role that I took on was when my mom was dying, was to help her prepare all these things that she needed to do. So she had, important things like a conversation that she felt she needed to have, something she wanted someone to understand, something she needed to have, communicated, things like that I would help her with. And then she just had regular things, like she knew my dad wasn't going to dust the piano, and she wanted me to dust the piano. So there were all these little things that she needed to prepare for her passing. And so that was actually the role that I took on for her, both for her and for myself. It was a period of service and a moment of healing. And then later I reflected and I thought, oh, in the dream, she asked me to prepare her dress. And what else would that mean except to prepare? Sorry, guys, I just dropped my computer. Apologies. What else would that mean except to prepare for her journey, right? So basically, she was asking me in the dream, "Please help me get ready to die." And I understood that later. And then recently I was having some challenges with my career and trying to think, like, what am I going to do? And had decided to move away from a certain, area of work. And then I was kind of confused because I had been offered a job here and there, and it was kind of looking tempting. Didn't know what to do. Should I stick with what, like, my spirit knew, which is that it was time to move into something else, or should I go with this tempting offer? And in the dream, it was very interesting. I was I was in a beautiful place, and it was this beautiful garden, and the people that I knew from the past that I'd worked with, they said, "Come, you can work here. Look how beautiful it is. Look how the sky is so green, and there's gardens outside, and your office has this beautiful window." And then the last thing they said was, "And look, it's just as close to your house as the other job that you didn't like." They didn't say it that way, but it's just as close to your house as that other job. And then all of a sudden I realized I had moved from that house. I didn't live in that house anymore. And so in that moment, I realized there's telling me something that sounds really good, but this is not where I am in my life anymore. And that was the understanding that I got from that dream. And then I had a confused dream where it was after my mom passed as well. I've obviously had a lot of dreams related to that. And I was really angry with her a lot. I was trying to talk to her, and she wouldn't listen to me, and she wouldn't listen to me. And I would be kind of like yelling at her, like, "Mom, I got to tell you something." I don't even know what I had to tell her. And she wouldn't listen. And in hindsight, I can see that it was my own psyche trying to come to terms with the fact that I could no longer speak to my mom in her physical body. And so at night, it was kind of processing the emotions of that so that I didn't have to face it during the day. So it was kind of like a confused dream, but it was also a form of processing. So this was when I was kind of looking at all this dream guidance. I kind of reviewed, and you guys might enjoy doing this as well, kind of reviewing dreams that maybe seemed important at some part of your life and trying to put them in the categories that Abdu'l-Baha created. So just 2 more slides. And this one is good because it's a prayer to be said after a nightmare. So it's wonderful that we're given this beautiful prayer that specifically if we have a nightmare, we're to say this one. And it says, "O thou by whose name the sea of joy moveth, and the fragrance of happiness is wafted. I ask of thee to show me from the wonders of thy favor that which shall brighten my eyes and shall gladden my heart. Verily, thou art the giver, the generous." So I just thought it was such a beautiful dream because basically you're saying, okay, I had a nightmare. God, would you please show me something that will gladden my heart? So it's a really lovely prayer that can be said after a nightmare. And then this is our last slide. And I think just the takeaway from this whole talk, if there's anything a major takeaway, is that the gift of the dream, the world of the dream, the experience of the dream, that this is a proof to us that there is a spiritual world and that we're not going to terminate in these physical bodies, that there is a world that we will continue to travel in. And in the 7 Valleys, Baha'u'llah says, "Consider the difference between these 2 worlds and the mysteries which they conceal, that thou mayest attain to divine confirmations and heavenly discoveries and enter the regions of holiness. God the Exalted hath placed these signs in men to the end that philosophers may not deny the mysteries of the life beyond, nor belittle that which hath been promised them." So very clearly, this is a gift given to us so that we won't have any doubt that there is a spiritual world for us. So I'm going to stop my sharing and come back to this screen.